Here is the single easiest and fastest way to raise pre seed funding for your startup, especially if you are a newer founder and you haven't raised funding before, you don't have the track record of raising funding before, or having some type of exit. This is how you do it, and it falls into this sentence: ask for investment, get advice. Ask for advice, get investment. It works pretty much every single time if you're doing it right and you're talking to the right people. And to back it up, I'm going to use my experience, but I'm also going to share a story that I recently heard from a founder, and hopefully you can learn from it and give it a try yourself, because really, what do you have to lose? I have raised over $100 million for my startups, other startups, as well as startup funds. And I've had conversations with literally hundreds of investors. And most of the time, when I come in hot and I don't have a reputation, or I don't have the expectation that's already set that I'm going to be asking for money, such as a cold call with a fresh investor, asking for advice has always been the best way to lead into it. But when I come in hot and I ask for investment, I typically will get advice, and then I have to sift through all that advice. I have to push through it. All that work that I have to do, kicking the tires and trying to qualify, pre-qualify, disqualify, that leads to the crazy making cycle that when it comes to fundraising, you don't have the time for as a pre-seed founder. I talk to hundreds of founders every month at startups.com, and the majority, about 80%, are trying to raise funding at an early stage. And everybody goes about it in a different way, but I'm recording this video because I heard a story from a founder I was talking to just the other day, and I thought you all need to hear this out there on my YouTube channel. This founder has never raised before and went out and sat with a very wealthy individual. It was an angel investor. That was his meeting. And he said to me, Ed, I decided to change my tact. Usually I've been pitching him on stuff, and I kept pitching him what we affectionately refer to as pitch slapping. That's what new founders always do. They're pitch slapping everybody, and nobody wants to talk to them. And this time he said, I decided to change my tact and just ask for advice, and began explaining to him what he was trying to do, and said, how did you go about doing it? You've been successful. What advice would you have for me? And by the end of that conversation, that high net worth individual, successful entrepreneur who could relate to the story, said, I believe in what you're doing. I'm going to send you some money. Now, it was only a small investment. It was only 4 figures, but for someone starting off, that could really make the difference. And it sets you on the path where at least you've got something, you've validated the idea, and then you can keep going and talk to other investors because you have that first pickle out of the jar. But what happened next was a pleasant surprise, because that angel sent double the amount of money that afternoon. It literally was done bang, bang. And on top of which, he didn't even need all the due diligence or paperwork. He just said, I believe in what you're doing. You don't even have to report back to me. I'd love to hear what you do with it, but go ahead and do it. And so this angel investor just threw money out there and said, let's do it. And I've done that as well. I've had founders come to me, and no, I'm not writing 6, 7-figure checks, but 5-figure checks. And I look at my bank account and I say, I've got the dry powder there. It's been sitting there. I believe in this founder. I'm morbidly curious, and I've written some of the dumbest angel checks I've ever written. And truth be told, I have not made a single dollar from it. But why do I do it? Because I can relate to that founder. I know what it's like to sit on that side of the table and have that really frustrating experience. And sometimes just the little amount gets that confidence going, which can completely change the trajectory of that founder's success and the startup. But on the flip side, I've had founders go in and ask for investment, and they get a whole bunch of advice and they end up confused. Why does that happen? Let me explain. It's because investors don't want to be mean. Yes, investors can be mean, and I know a lot of jerks as investors, but I know a lot of really nice people who don't want to give the founder the direct letdown. So what they end up doing is saying, I think my advice is going to be just as good as investment, and they start pouring on the advice, not understanding that it can do the exact opposite effect of what is intended by the founder or the investor. But on certain occasions, I've had founders put through the ringer. They've had the worst experiences because the investor believes that they're super smart and they become condescending. I've had founders go to an investor who sat at the top echelon of investment banking. And investment bankers, they don't understand what it means to invest in founder. Not everybody, but in general, investment banking and VC are two completely different worlds. So what this investor did was they said, I'm going to give you some advice. You need to learn financial models and come up with a big plan. And he railed on them and made them feel really bad. These two founders then spent the next 2 weeks learning how to do financial modeling and projections, and came out with this glorious thick stack of spreadsheets and said, we're going to present it to you. And the investor said, okay, that's great. Still didn't invest. And I had to be the one to explain to these founders, true startup investors at your stage don't believe in your projections anyway. Anybody can make a financial projection and have it go up and to the right. They're not going to sit there and have you defend every single dollar and penny that you're projecting to make, because we have to do our own rubrics as investors. Everybody got their own methodology, and true investors that understand startups also recognize and empathize with founders that you are not meant to have those skills. You are not an investment banker. You're not a CPA. You don't have an accounting degree. So why expect the founder to go through all that rigmarole for a financial model and projections when they should be working on idea validation, customer discovery, problem solution fit, shipping product, talking to customers, getting feedback? That's what we're looking for. But unfortunately, founders go to investors and they ask for investment and they get this tidal wave of advice and they feel insecure and they say, if I do all these things, if I take it all seriously, up to the point where sometimes they even pivot their startups. And that's the worst thing you can do based on investor opinion. And it leads to that crazy making cycle where you are just getting ghosted, or you get strung along and you jump through a whole bunch of hoops just to get a no at the end, when you could have been building your product, getting traction, doing all the things that real startup investors are looking for. But instead, to protect yourself, all you have to do is go in and ask advice and say, you have experience doing this. If you're in my shoes, what would you do? And now they have to tell you what they're really thinking and give you that advice, or they get off really easy. They give you some little bit of tidbits here and there, and then both can retreat from each other. No harm, no foul. Nobody has to get their hopes up. Nobody has to feel obligated to stay in there and continue to have that conversation. But the other thing is, if you're asking advice, you're making an emotional connection, because investors love to give advice, especially those who've been successful in business. And they get emotionally involved in your business and they start thinking to themselves, hey, why don't I write this check? And you don't even have to ask. A lot of times, these individuals say, well, maybe I should invest, or what do you think about if I invest it? And I see this conversation happening over and over again. And I'm not just making this up. I'm sure if you go talk to other founders and you say, is this principle true? Ask for investment, get advice. Ask for advice, get investment. And you talk to a founder that has experience, has gone through all the rigmarole, all the steps, all the crazy making long marathon races to try and raise funding, they're going to give you corroborative evidence that this principle holds true. I dare you to go test it. But just make sure you're asking for advice in a legitimate, authentic way, not leading to a pitch slap. That requires you to work on your presentation skills, your empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence, your executive presence. There's the science and the evidence and the data that we can present to you, say this is going to work more often than not. But if you don't have the skills to present it and talk to investors like human beings instead of ATMs, this won't work either. That is your warning if you decide to try and put this into practice. But I always say, at least try it. And I would never try to ask you to do something that I haven't done myself. 4 degrees of success. I'll always be upfront with you. Check out the other videos. I got plenty of tips on fundraising on this channel. I'm here to help you out. Look me up. You can look at my background and see where I'm coming from. And if you're thinking about it, join me at startups.com. I got a special code in the description, and I'm going to invite you to spend time with me so we can work this out. I'd love to help you.